Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for Stars of Franchising.
Get ready for a roller coaster ride through the world of franchising as we bring you the best stories of inspiration and entrepreneurial grit and turning dreams into franchise realities.
That's right, Vinny. From emerging to global brands, we'll chat with the genius minds behind the magic. All brought to you by the Tariq Fareed Franchise Institute at Babson College. I'm Ab.
And I'm Vini. Now, buckle up for some serious inspiration.
Welcome to our guest, Ken Doyle, to my right from the Halifax group. And tonight's episode, we're really honored and grateful to have Ken here to talk about an interesting trend over the last 15, 20 years, and even recently on private equity investing in, yes, the franchise model. So welcome, Ken. We're glad to have you here.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
As you know, Babson is a hotbed for entrepreneurship and #1 school in business, and we've recently launched this Franchise Institute to really focus on some of the trends, misconceptions, opportunities, and going to cut across a lot of different guests. And you're our first guest, and we just thought it'd be fun to talk about your experiences, what calls you to do what you do, and maybe move into franchising as a platform or a segment to invest with private equity.
Sure. A little bit of background on how I got into the franchising space. Originally started about 22 years ago. Was co-founder of a private equity firm based out of D.C. Multi-focus, multi-industries. Actually started originally with a strong focus on healthcare. But through some introductions that we were made through some other private equity firms, had the opportunity to make one of our first original investments as a franchisor, one that everybody knows pretty well, which is Meineke. Was an extremely successful transaction for us and led us into adding franchising as one of the disciplines within the Halifax group, and now makes up one of pretty much of about 4 different industry sectors.
Great. Well, on that, and I'll kick off with the first question on the heels of that. When was that investment? Because it talks to maybe why private equity hadn't been involved as much back then. But when was that, Ken?
I don't actually. I'm trying to remember the date. I don't actually have it. It was early in our. We started the fund in 2000, and it was so probably around 2003, 2004. But I can get that information.
Got it. Well, given when that was and what you've seen as an investor, board member over the years, investing in both franchisees and franchisors, what do people misunderstand about franchising most from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. If you look at both the franchising and the franchisor, I think a lot of people don't appreciate what they hear and see mostly is restaurant transactions, and that's really a lot of cases where the industry has got the most volume. But franchising has really encompassed many industries and continues. We did one of the early deals in healthcare space. We did a platform on over in the UK, so it's international. So I think what people don't really appreciate is franchising is a model, a way of scaling. That can be used in many different industries, and can be used in many different aspects. And we've through our history, we've done both franchise as a franchisor, and we've done a franchisee. And going to your part of that question, I think the biggest change or the biggest has been the interest in franchise in totality. Mm-hmm. Clearly, many more private equity firms have found the desire to get in and really have seen the benefits of franchising. But probably within that sector, the biggest change has been appetite to get into franchising as a franchisee rather than a franchisor.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn the next one over to you, Vinny.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Thanks again for joining us today. Now, over the past 20 years, basically, you've been in this business of investing in franchising operations. And over that time, would you recall maybe what you consider maybe your biggest failure, and or something that if you have to do it again, you would do it differently? What is that, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the reasons we really liked franchising, and one of the reasons we got into it, my background as a CPA and as a lender at one point in time, very focused on cash flow and stability, was areas that was interest to me, and franchising really is one of those models that if you pick the right sectors and the right companies, really fit that bill. And so that's why we really found it an industry that you can safely put leverage on, and you can pay down debt, and you can do it in a very disciplined manner. And so part of the answer for us is we have not had any exits that have been negative out of our transactions. They have all been positive, and it goes to, I think, the stability. Now, we currently have an investment in the fitness space that you could not imagine. None of us imagined COVID, and even that transaction through no fault of its own and being closed for a significant portion of time. I mean, literally no one can come in the door. Is working its way back and rebounding slowly as people get back in the habit. One of the challenges with that type of industry is that it's a habit business, and when you break everybody's habit, it's a little bit challenging. But even that one shows you the stability. We are back in positive cash flow and trying to grow back to where we were from what you can imagine is almost one of the worst possible outcomes that could happen to a retail environment would be to be shut down for the length of time we were. So that's our challenge. All the other ones have been successful exits, but and that one we expect to be a successful exit, but that one definitely was not something we saw coming.
Okay. Thank you, Ken.
Well, I know you're big on financial models, so I'm sure your cases or scenarios didn't include any zero revenue, zero EBITDA, did it?
No. I mean, that's the thing that's about franchising. I mean, either at the franchisee or the franchisor. I mean, we're not, because of the nature of being private equity, and our last fund was over $600 million. Prior funds are 400, 200. We're not typically dealing with startup concepts. So we're dealing with known brands of different levels, and in franchising there is a significant amount of data and history and comparison that you can make. It's one of the reasons we really like the industry. And you've got if you do it right, you have a lot of concentration, and so the sustainability is what attracts us. But no one could come up with a scenario that said basically you'd be shut down. Yeah. You always come up with the ones, competitor comes in, we have to open 3, or rents. You come up with a lot of scenarios that we'd go through. But 20 years, I thought I'd seen just about everything. Yeah. COVID was a brand new one.
Me too. So a little bit related to that. And we talked about some of the misunderstood nature of franchising. Can you pinpoint one or two myths people have, or a common myth around franchising that you've learned or seen that we can learn from?
Yeah, well, I'll take on I split them because there are two, franchisor and franchisee are two. Yeah, they're in the same industry, but there's a lot of dynamics that are very different. The one I'll take, we were one of the first to really, from a private equity firm. We were early into franchising anyways, but we were clearly one of the first, I think, that was sort of willing to look at franchisees. And I think the myth there was that, how could you invest in something where effectively you as a owner, because we're control investors in private equity, but you don't control the brand. You don't control a lot of the pricing to some degree. You don't control, a good chunk of the marketing, at least on the national level. How can you get comfortable with that? And our view after sort of looking at it and doing the research was that if you stick with and do your homework like you would any other deal and get comfortable with the way the brand's being run, its history, its ups and downs and what it's done, you don't have to control everything. And actually, in some regards, that's a good thing. Has there been push shove at times as a franchisee with the franchisor? Yes. But you concentrate on the things you can control. In a lot of cases, a franchisee, that is going out and growing the footprint, opening new locations, buying territories that are adjacent or in attractive areas. So you focus on the growth that you can focus on. And then, you have to know going in that you've got to do your due diligence has to be not on just the franchisee, it has to be on the franchisor, because you are turning over a significant amount of what would normally be some of the decision-making areas. But I think, we've talked about this in the past. Our thought going in originally into franchisees was, and some of this has changed over time with more competition, was that even though we were giving up some level of control and we were giving up some level of, of control even on exits, you have to get permission. And some of the things you want to do, you have to get permission, which is not always the most, private equity guys, that's not something that we love to do. But the when you looked at the economic difference, because as a private equity, I view it as you're buying cash flow, right? And the multiples at which you could buy the same cash flow effectively at the franchisee level versus what the multiples to buy the franchisor, we thought were just out of whack. And in our first transaction with Papa John's, it was way out of whack. And so, we're the largest franchisee doing the same business or same cash flows, as far as where it's coming from, the risk, the inherent. And so why would we not, in a sense, give up some of that, maybe call it freedoms, but we would be buying at a significantly lower multiple. Now, over time, as you've seen in yours, and we've done deals together, those multiples have probably shrunk the gap, at least between them.
Right. I mean, it's fascinating. It really, you saw an opportunity and you leveraged the knowledge about franchising. But I love your comment about the due diligence of the franchisee and the franchisor needed to be done because you were quote unquote ceding control, as you mentioned, but that you actually, the myth allowed you to give up something that you didn't have to do as a franchisee and focus on your strengths. So that's fascinating. And you were early in the game because it wasn't seen much. So kudos to you all for that.
And if I may piggyback on that question from Ab, given your interactions with both franchisees and franchisors, what would you say are the top 3 things that the best franchisees do? And then the same thing for the franchisors that we could learn from.
Okay, well, I don't know about 3, but the franchisees, good franchisees, going back to what we talk about, do what I call the little things well. And what I mean by that is you got to get some entrepreneurs to get involved in franchising, and you are paying a fee to the franchisor for the expertise, for the business model, for the systems, the processes of how to do this. And if you've selected the right ones, they have done this many. It doesn't mean they're perfect, but they have hundreds or maybe 1,000 units that they've done, and they're analyzing the data, and they're hopefully continuing to perfect it as to what is your labor should look like, how many units should you have, how should you staff, how should you inventory, all these things that you're getting as a franchisee and paying for. And what we find in some franchisees is they want to ignore it. They want to go do their own thing. And I know better. And, I'm not saying, we have some of the great innovations in some of the franchise systems have come from franchisees. A good franchisor, sort of half answer your question the other way, understands that some of their best innovation comes from their franchisee. It's somebody doing something and they spot it and they say, how do we take that and now apply that over the other 1,000 or 2,000 units or whatever you have? But the flip side is you're doing yourself a disservice to yourself and to the whole system if you're just out being a cowboy. If you're not following the process, you shouldn't have gotten involved in that business, right? Because that's fine. You should be an entrepreneur. Maybe you go design your own pizza or hamburger if that's what you want to do and you think you have a better model. Nothing wrong. People have done very well at that. But then but to become a franchisee, pay what you're paying and then not follow the system. I think that, and for us, the great benefit is having been a franchisor and a franchisee. We understand, to your question, what each role, and when both sides are playing their role, that's when it works best for both. If the franchisor is not doing their job, and a lot of them don't, they want to sell franchisees and they want to sell as many as they can. They want to grow as fast as they can, and they don't spend the money to support. That's a two-way. If they're not have the number of people and the quality of the people to go out and actually be mentors and and go back into the franchisees and help them grow their businesses, then they don't deserve the fee that they're receiving. So this is a two-way street, and the systems that work really well, everybody stays in their lane, does what they're supposed to be doing, but learns from each other and has that respect for each other. And a lot of them do that, but where a lot of franchises get upside down is when there's really bad relationships between franchisees and franchisors. And it happens, and it's natural. The best management teams figure out how to bridge that, find common ground, and move forward, because as much as they are tied at the hip, and a franchisor, one can't be successful without the other.
Right.
Franchisor can't be successful without good franchisees, and franchisees sure can't be successful if they've got a bad franchisor. So you both need each other. But a misconception a lot of times is that they're both, a lot of franchisors like to say, we're in alignment. Well, that's not necessarily true. You are in some cases, but some cases you're not.
Which is okay.
But there is going to be conflict because take a case of, you may have a franchisor that sells certain products or is the distributor. They've got a different economic model. Right? On top of that, here's a classic one we talked a little bit about. Franchisor collects most of their revenue off the top of your revenue. They are, other than you as a franchisee, if you go bankrupt, that's a problem. But if you have margin compression, like we're seeing right now, the franchisor is actually not feeling that same level of pain. Now, a good franchisor will be in touch with the health of their system and understand, like a couple of the guys we've done and you've seen in the past, where they will go share that. They understand that they're only as good as their franchisee base, and at a certain point, that pain can't get too out of whack. And they will figure out ways to share the pain and share the gain. That's good systems. But again, some are public. Like all your franchisors are public. Your other, and they can be driven by a different animal. That's when we've seen systems get in trouble.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And you hit on it a little bit, and on specifically what's a successful franchisee personality trait would be. They have to be able to balance a little bit of being entrepreneurial and innovative, but following the system. And if you could elaborate maybe that for the franchisor that you shared with our class today, by the way, thank you. One of the early lessons you learned about being a great franchisor and the trait there, and it has to do with a franchisee. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, great franchisors. Listen, the first, I had my first and one of my great mentors in this space was a gentleman, Ken Walker. He founded, he was the original CEO for us on Meineke. He has sat on a number of our boards and really been a huge influence on Halifax. And so he was the first one. We had never done a franchise deal together, and and he ended up being president of the Franchise Association and everything else. So he sort of taught us, and the one lesson that was almost day one and has stuck to this day is the best is you are only as good as your franchisees. And he took that to heart. I mean, he was like, you've got to go and dig down, and you've got to figure out what's going on, and you've got to understand. And this is where franchisors, some of them, I don't want to call it, they either get too big or they miss it. they see themselves as sort of corporate and franchisees. His attitude was very much the franchisee are the company, we're the support staff.
Right.
That was his view of a franchisor. They are the support staff. And if you want to be successful and grow, you got to figure out ways to support the franchisees. And that's the best ones. The ones that figure that out, that the more, rather than trying to fight them or rather than trying to do this, you got to figure out a way. They are your engine. You are just there to try to support them with expertise, with leverage, because you can spend the money on IT, you can spend the money on, and then spread it across. You know all the data from 2,000 units or whatever. You can spread best practices. That's the role that you should be playing as franchisor. And so that is something that we really learned early on, and it goes to what makes a good franchisor. We talked about it today. How do you look at how do you evaluate a franchisor system? Go into the franchisee. Right?
Are they making money? What are they
making money? And then not just is this one making money? What is the the average age of your franchises? How long are they in the system? Are they buying in the system, or not? If you have a franchisor that's just spinning, franchisees just to get the new revenue, and you're seeing a lot of them blow out pretty quickly. I mean, these are all things you got to look for, but they all come down to, what are your franchisees doing? And that's the great franchisors understand.
And what would you say for someone starting off or trying to get into franchising? What would be that one piece of advice you will give?
Well, it depends on whether they're trying to get in. I'm assuming that most will probably, from that question, will be maybe looking for a franchisee to invest in. Yeah. And so I will go the opposite direction. Well, two pieces on that. One, I'd go, you got to go figure out and do your due diligence on the franchisor. And it's both economically, is it a good franchise system? Because if it's not, then it doesn't make any sense to invest. But part of it is culturally and everything, does it match you? Because again, you're giving up a significant part of some of the decision making you'd make. So if you're not culturally aligned, if this isn't, they don't think the way you do, if they don't treat you the way you want to be treated, I mean, business is business. Just because they're all franchisor, if you've seen one franchisor, you've seen one franchisor, right? So you've got to understand: are they strict type? Or they act as partners? I mean, each franchisor has its own culture and its own branding, and so just like we always say as an investor, don't just pick the investor if you're selling your company and you're going to roll over. Don't just pick the investor who gives you the best valuation. If you're going to roll and you're going to stay, which we do in our transactions, you're getting into a marriage, right? For 3 to 5, 7 years, maybe. Right. Well, even more so, if you're coming in and becoming a franchisee, you are entering into a true marriage, and one in which you're actually giving up a lot of the decision making to somebody above you, effectively.
Freedom also.
A real boss. So you better, and for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's difficult by nature, right? The reason they want to be entrepreneurs is that they want to be their own boss. Franchising is an interesting sort of mix. You get to be your own boss at a level, but you're not at a certain level. So you really need to be, do they have the same value system that you're looking for? And then the next type of questions clearly are, is there growth opportunities? Are you interested in doing de novos? Okay, well, do they have a lot of openings around you? Do they help do acquisitions, or are they ones that don't like their franchisees to get too big? I mean, these are the type of questions that you really need to understand, because, as again, you've seen one, you've only seen one. There's some that love their franchisees to get sophisticated and big. There's other ones that like to keep their franchisee base very unsophisticated and small. It's a cultural and a management team issue. So you got to make sure that you fit. If you're going to invest your life, a lot of people invest pretty much their pension or their 401k to roll it over after a business and start to become a franchisee. You're pretty much probably putting a big chunk of your dollars in there. You better not just like it economically. You better like it from what it does and how it acts.
Right, and so there's a little bit of due diligence there.
Yeah, and that actually, question we came up with is, how do you do due diligence? Clearly, there's due diligence you need to do on a franchisor. But the only way to do real due diligence in this is go talk to other franchisees.
Talk to me about that. What do you mean by that?
It is the life. It goes right back in a circle, right? The lifeblood of a franchisor is franchisees. Mm-hmm. You need to go out there, and the great thing about this industry is the data, the information, the information memoranda, the circulars and everything. You can find out who's franchisees. Get on the phone, pound the pavement, go walk into locations. It is one of the easiest industries to do due diligence on as far as that aspect of it, to go out there. If you're going to make an investment, talk to as many. And don't do what some people do, which is the franchisor gives them a list and says, call these.
Right.
Those are exactly the ones you probably don't want to talk to, right? You want to go out and you want to find one guy and you say, who else do you want me to talk to?
Right.
Because you're going to find all the scuttlebutt about the industry. You're going to find out how they really do treat. Do they, they may tell you, we love you get bigger, and then you talk to two and they say, nah, last time I tried to buy something, they said no, and they're really, we're having this fight with the team because they keep all the economics and they keep, all these things you will find out. Franchisees love to talk about their business, and if it's a good system, good or bad, they love to talk about it. So it's all free. All you got to do is just call them up.
Yeah, the thing I love about what you said is you're doing that same due diligence, Ken, right, on the franchisor by calling their franchisees and digging and understanding other lawsuits, which I think is obviously served you well. But most importantly, what I heard you say, which is great for our audience, is this system and this process, and it's by law, they have to file an offering disclosure document called the FDD that lists every single franchisee. So it's incumbent on you to do that due diligence as a potential franchisee, but also it's set up for you to do that if you choose to do it.
What other industry lays that out for you that neatly? So there's no excuse for ending up into a system and saying, I didn't know they do that. I mean, it's right there. It's just whether you're willing to do the homework.
And so you talked about this, or you mentioned something close to that in one of your comments. When you look at this last 3 years, 2-3 years, especially during the pandemic, during the lockdown, was there an innovation in franchising that happened that you think that innovation could actually transform or shape what we're going to see in the way franchising is done from now on?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would say it's in particular to just franchising, but what I think we are seeing due to COVID, and then because of the issues there, in a lot of cases, staffing issues, and then trying to keep people separated. And then now that we've gone into this robust, issue with trying to find, trying to find people, the cost of labor has gone way up. You're not going to see this in every sector, but clearly, I don't know, you probably know better what percentage of franchising is, falls into the restaurant space and everything else. But the automation, is just, I think, going to explode. Everybody is moving their models either through automation or through drive-through or other avenues to reduce the people side, and reduce the headcount effectively. And what you've got going on is almost a perfect. You've got a shortage of labor. You've got a generation now of everybody who's very comfortable, not meeting people face to face, and are willing to lose, what age now, basically, of young people and everything else growing up with a laptop or some form of touch, from the time they've been kids. You've got minimum wage issues that are out there. Everything is, and then the cost of a lot of this technology is going down exactly when everything else is going up, and we're hitting that inflection point. I saw it, and we've seen it much more. You saw it in Europe probably way before you saw it here. I think 5 years, even before COVID, I was over in Europe, and you'd walk into a new McDonald's over there, and there wasn't a person to take an order in there. Cool. You did everything by the screen. You put your money in by the screen, and it literally gave you. You paid for it. It gave you a card. You sat down anywhere and put your number up. and somebody would bring it out from the back. And we are going to see that across the board. We're seeing a lot of the new concepts don't have table service.
Right.
Everything that you can do to sort of, and because it's a necessity, and because historically, generations before, whatever, that would be unacceptable. That wasn't what they wanted from a dining experience. And again, I'm getting a little bit just into restaurants, but that does make up a big share of franchising.
It does.
What people's perception of going out to dinner was to sit down and be served and everything else.
The experience.
And the new generation and everything else, that's one, they're going out way more often. And that whole they actually would rather not be anybody touch them. They'd rather not anybody come by. And they're just very comfortable ordering everything through a screen and everything else. So that, I think, right now, we're seeing the biggest is really, you have to look at these models and figure out whether some of them, what that means to the models, and whether some models, they may be more attractive if you think about how you may be able to make those economics work. But right now, our biggest challenge out there, and this is not just franchising, just across our businesses, is either almost every one of them, their growth is somehow being limited due to labor. If you talk to every CEO, everyone, if you tell them what's your biggest issue, labor. It's affecting their ability to grow. It's affecting their customer service levels. It's affecting their margins. It's a huge issue out there. Well, one of the ways is, like everything in this, it will get solved, and we're going to see technology solve a chunk of it.
Fascinating. And who would have thought you'd have restaurants closing on Monday and Tuesday, or due to labor? And we've seen that with franchisees, across the board, which is fascinating. And I think you're right. The technology is going to just continue, especially as we saw drive-throughs, and any model that had technology-enabled services when the pandemic hit was able to fare better. Did you see that?
We're seeing how many you've seen. Certain locations and everything else, when they're gutting or doing a refab or whatever, actually reducing significantly their sit down space and doubling or tripling their drive-through. Again, because you got a bunch of people in the back, they're just hammering it through. It's a different model. And if you've seen the guys that have been able to fare the best, are the guys that to some degree take out drive-through.
Right.
That's the ones that made out the best during COVID.
Indeed. Okay, great. Good stuff. One thing I'd love to talk about and get your take is, one of the beauties of being here at Babson, we've got a lot of thought leaders and separate institutes, one focused on social innovation, and Cheryl Kaiser, who is our brilliant director of that institute, and I have been collaborating, talking about franchising and being a model for community impact and businesses in a community serving a local community's needs through that franchisee, and whether that's applying efforts to make an impact in that community for sustainability or other related issues. Can you just talk about, if you've seen, does that resonate at all? Have you seen anything from the franchise model being structured that way that you can point to that can we can learn from?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. I mean, one would be more than just franchising, but I think going back to some of our conversations on finding employees and everything else, and what are you getting when you have a franchisor? I mean, the brand is the number one thing, right? Mm-hmm. And what we're definitely seeing across the board is when you're out there, and if you're a franchisor and you're effectively one of your main jobs is to sell the brand. I mean, that's why people pay to be in a franchisee, is because somebody else is basically has got a brand that you're going to leverage off of. And in this day and age, we're seeing it with which companies are successful out there, and it be whatever space, restaurant space, anything else. Your brand has to have, with the younger generation and everything else, has to have that view that you are in touch with the things that matter. Brands have always been, that's how brands were built, right? And what you're seeing, I think, now is the thing that people are resonating with certain brands is things that feel like they're meaningful. They don't want just the average thing. They don't want the company that's perceived to be a bad actor. So it's important for finding employees Employees just aren't willing. I mean, mostly in this environment, employers aren't just willing to work for anybody.
And especially given your point about the labor issues,
the
right?
labor
They're gonna
issue,
stick with one
you've got to be somewhere where your employees, it's not just a paycheck for this generation or other generations now.
Yeah.
There is a secondary. They want to be proud of what's going on, what the company means. And if you can't touch that as a brand, you can't drive that, you're going to have problems on hiring, retention, and then you're not going to drive a lot of the newer your customer base that you want because somebody else will. Whether it's somebody like Tom's or going to give back a certain percentage, or they're going to donate, or there's got to be something else that people attach their brands to. So I think it's hugely important across the board, and where I think it's specifically with the franchisee franchisor, and it's something we also saw in healthcare a little bit. One of the benefits of the system, in at least most franchisees, is that your owner, your operator, is on the ground.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a hired gun, and that's meaningful. They're hopefully, if they're doing their job, they're involved in that community.
Right.
They're involved in the local events and organizations, and they're contributing to the local charities. They're doing that type of thing because they are probably living in that community and they're part of it. Where if you're a non-franchised, right, by the time you get down to the local level, you're probably 3 levels down on the bureaucracy, right? You got some young person who's been hired. They represent the company, but they just don't have the same vested interest as somebody who owns something. It's interesting, not to get too off topic, but we found a couple of mistakes or things we saw in healthcare was that as we try to consolidate in healthcare, we would find in a lot of cases that the benefits we got from consolidation did not make up for what we lost when we had to compete against a healthcare company that had a local team versus our just hired person.
Corporate.
They just don't you don't have the same stake in the community, and the community, mostly in this day and age, doesn't have the same stake back. And that is an important aspect in today's world.
So it's fair to say, it sounds like, before I turn it over to Vinny, that's part of your due diligence of brands. If you're buying franchisor brands, right? What are they doing?
Yeah, we're not huge brand guys, but in this day and age, you've got to. It's just we're in a different world, and you've got to understand how your brand, is perceived by the consumer, because that is something for growth, and if there's a danger, there's all sorts of caveats with that. You got to be very careful from branding point of view. A lot of franchisors, for whatever reason, historically have used certain individuals as brand agents. And if something goes wrong, and we've seen it, again, people are just not tolerant of that anymore.
This is awesome. This is really going great. Ken, thank you so much. I've seen many people tell us that an entrepreneur cannot be a franchisee, or a franchisee can never be an entrepreneur. It's impossible. Or even some people saying, what has franchising got to do with entrepreneurship? Are you crazy? What do you need? What do you have to speak to that? If you have to?
I think that's just it's totally wrong. I can understand. We had one of our other private conversations where that perception could be there, but I think to a large degree, entrepreneurship and franchising is a perfect match. To be an entrepreneur hopefully doesn't mean that you're such a control freak that you have to control every aspect. There's a lot of a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are very good at something. Like when we had Meineke, most of our franchisees were prior mechanics. A huge chunk of them were mechanics. And then they wanted to own something themselves. They wanted to build and create some goodwill, create some ownership. Natural extension would be to buy Meineke. Well, they will be the first. They're entrepreneurs. They're building that business. But they don't want to do figure out, how to brand or how to do international marketing or any of this other stuff. They wanted to be really good mechanics. They had great relationships. They knew how to talk to and have relationships with their customers. That they knew how to do. But for somebody then to hand them basically the purchasing systems, the accounting systems, tell them exactly how to do it, when you should be open, give them we're going to send you all, your supplies when you need it. These are things that they didn't. Why should they be expected to instantaneously learn that or somehow know that? They would have probably, if they tried to go out there and just start, a lot of them would have failed because they've got expertise in a piece. Franchising is perfect for them in that somebody else is providing those activities and everything else that they either can't or don't want to do, and they concentrate on what they do very well. Cool. So I think it's a great match, as long as, going back to the comment we made, that you as an entrepreneur pick the right system that meets your needs and your desires. If you have a desire to do a lot, then don't pick that type of franchise, or don't pick a franchisor. But I think for most people, franchise. You guys know better than me what the failure rate on new businesses are.
It's about 90%.
Yeah, it's like it's huge.
Yeah,
and it's because who can be expected to know all the things and be all the things? Whereas you go into a franchise system, you are given, if you follow it. Going back to one of our other conversations, if you do what you're supposed to do, somebody is already giving you the roadmap.
Right.
Now you just have to go do what you do, which is sell locally, be good with customers, hire well. But all the other pieces of it, somebody is giving you the blueprint. And it's well worth the money if both sides are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It feels sometimes like, I'm giving away 5% to this and that. But if you really look at what a good franchisor is doing, then it's well worth it. And if there's not worth it, then shame on the franchisor, and that's a whole another issue.
Great stuff, and lessons to live by for sure. One final question, and then I'll turn it to Vinny to see if he has one as well. You talked a little bit about technology, at least impact on the restaurants. Can you talk to a current trend that you think, Ken, will most shape the future of franchising going forward? Whether that's market segments or what have you, but what do you see for the future?
Yeah, I'll stick with probably we usually stick with what we're closest to and know best, and I think one of the interesting things that we've seen, I've seen over the last couple of years and everything else is. On the franchisee base is because of the capital coming in, and many more players like ourselves that are getting involved with more capital and more just more interest. We're seeing, I think, a much more sophisticated base in a lot of these businesses of franchisees, and we're seeing. In a lot of cases, the average number of franchisees, bigger, and I think the franchisors are getting over a misconception. The early days we were in, everybody's like, I don't want my franchisees to get too big. Right. I don't want them to get too powerful.
What is private equity?
I don't want any, what's private equity going to be doing here? Right. And then there's, franchisors, because a lot of franchisors now have private equity in them. They get the joke, and they've said, well, wait a minute, these guys have capital. They, our biggest issue is that a lot of our guys, our franchisees grow. They don't have the experience, the expertise to be. One thing that almost every franchisor I've ever associated does not do well is teach franchisees how to be multi-unit. Yeah. If you look at the training programs of a franchisor, nothing has to do with running multi-units. Everything's how to run a unit. Right? And then they expect their best guys to go get 4, 5, 6, and then they fail. Because they're good if they can have a hands-on, but these people don't have degree or have done it, and now all of a sudden they go from a model where they walk in, they manage every day, they see it, they touch it, they feel it. They can do that with 1, they can do that with 2, maybe they can do that with 3, but at a certain point that model doesn't work any longer.
It's different doing.
And then all of a sudden the franchisor goes, well, why did my best friend? That guy was great. What happened? Well, you just put him in a whole different environment. Yeah. Now he's got a general manager. He's got to actually be a manager, not a store operator, right? You never trained him. So what's happening is they still don't do it, and they don't want to really do it. So they look at it from having private equity involved, and they're like, well, wait a minute, this is great. These guys, I mean, they got sophistication. They'll do all that work. And everyone will tell you that when you get private equity involved as a franchisor, you get better reporting, you get better systems, you get better IT, right? Because that's what we do. Now, do they like the fact that most of us are leveraged? There's trade-offs with everything in the world. And so some of them are still skittish about the leverage we put on. Some of them are still skittish about the size that a private equity will get to. But, I think you're going to see, like you've heard some of the stuff. I mean, Planet Fitness. I mean, it's like 90% now. Its biggest ones are all private equity owned. And they couldn't grow. They had when they had 50 guys all with 3, and it was very difficult to manage that, and they couldn't get the growth they wanted, and everybody was sort of a lot of it wasn't their fault. They didn't have the training, they didn't have the dollars,
Capital.
They didn't have the scale. Bring private equity in, you get all that, but with that comes some trade-offs, and I think that dynamic, some franchisors are getting it, some are still lagging, but I do think as far as a trend line, I think you're going to see much more sophistication. I think you're going to see much bigger, and I think you're going to see a lot of people as franchisees build. Their model is going to build to a size to then sell to private equity, and then they're going to grow it.
Sounds like adding to scale.
Which I tell you, one of the interesting, I don't know, it's just a whole thing that came up we never talked even about today. One of the issues out there used to be with franchisees was exits.
Yeah.
Right, the only real exit person. A lot of cases, the only real exit was the franchisor, or they try to have to sell it in the family or keep it in the family somehow. And maybe if they were lucky, they'd find a franchisor, a franchisee that was nearby that might want it. And that was a good case, but their options were somewhat limited. Private equity is blown open there, and really, that's why multiples have gone up. Is a huge benefit to franchisees. Mostly on their exit scenario.
On all sizes too. What we've seen, and you're alluding to this, I think, which is if you're a 3-unit Orange Theory Fitness owner or Planet Fitness or a Dunkin', and private equity players are in your market with 50 to 160 or even 20, you can now sell to them. So that's fascinating. It gives exit opportunities for maybe somebody, they reach 3 or 4, they see they've built it, they've grown it, and now there's this other way to sell it versus, and for a bigger value, you're right?
Because it's competition. Yeah. And what used to be private, franchisee, I mean, when we first started back, I mean, people were like, you ever spend more than 4 or 5? I mean, 6 was like, oh my God, crazy multiple
6 times EBITDA, yeah.
Yeah, and that's not now. It's like
right.
If you got a scale, you got something, you've got private equity. That's the multiples have definitely gone up, and that's part of it because you've got more demand, right? I mean, more options.
So, Kate, you've had exposure to franchising world in the U.S. and outside the U.S., especially Europe. Are there unique differences between those two worlds? And then what can we learn? What can you teach us about?
Well, I don't know how much I can teach you about it, but I will say that one of the things that we've learned over the time is that even more so than any other business, you've got to be very careful when you look at growth, making assumptions on where you're going to go to if you're a franchisor. Because the first problem you have is many countries' legal systems do not have the concept of a franchisee or franchisor, or in certain countries don't have the protections. You end up with you have a franchisee, but you can have all sorts of issues with if those try to fire or of having those employees basically roll up to the franchisor. I mean, there's just a lot of. I mean, you probably know the history better than I do, but franchising was inherently a very U.S. System, and a lot of other countries are now mostly as people like McDonald's, and it's blowing up across the world, but a lot of countries. Really, from a legal, you got to be very careful that they actually support it, and you're not going to be involved and think you've got a franchise system, and you really don't. Same thing happens with franchisor, because franchisors have a very challenging situation. We had to sit through and do a lot of analysis at a board level every time. Okay, there's a country. It's an interesting country to go into. Do we want to grow it? Do we want to build them?
Right.
Some cases, yes, some no. Do we want to just franchise them the same way we are? But that's got the best economics. But now you got to build. Maybe there's a different language. There's
Local
different,
market knowledge.
all this stuff you got to build. Do you want to build that at your corporate headquarters for this brand new country, or do you want to sell to basically a country franchise becomes a semi they sit as a franchisor between it. So you've got a franchisor, then you have a country, and they take half basically the royalties, and then they develop and manage that country. That takes all the local local out and puts it over to them. So there's way different ways you can do it, and everyone's got their pros and their cons. But legal and culturally, you've got to be very careful, because one of the things about the challenges with franchise, right? The whole concept is that you have this box you built to make it scalable and easy and replicable. It's got to look the same, taste the same. Well, that runs it as you want everybody to do the same. That's the scalability of franchising. But then you drop them in different countries where that
Different tastes.
and then all of a sudden, am I going to just force everybody to do it the way? How much creativity am I going to allow? How much am I going to allow? Because then you start to lose the benefits of franchising, because people want. I mean, part of the ring is if I go to McDonald's, I expect my McDonald's tastes the same here, tastes the same there. But maybe that doesn't work in whatever country, because they don't. I mean, maybe they have a thing against meat. Maybe they have a thing against whatever it is. Maybe your name means something very different in another country.
Offensive, right? Or maybe
it's like not good, right? So there's a lot of issues on the franchisor side on how to do it. Franchisee side, I said you got to be very careful, because a lot of guys have purchased countries, and what they find is they're left out. I mean, they basically pay the money, they're given the territory, and then they turn around and the franchisor is gone. Because franchisors doesn't know how to help them. And because they don't. That's the point. That's why they gave the whole country sold it to somebody and told them, you go do it, because I don't understand the language. I don't have the back office. My accounting system may not tie in. There's all these things that the franchisor is like, I want to collect the $1 million check, for, I don't know, Romania, whatever, and give you the country, because I don't really know how to grow it myself, and I'll take the $1 million. You go figure it out. That person then buys it and then expects he's getting something from corporate, and the corporate's like, no, that's why I gave it to you. And you got this. So international is
challenging.
It's challenging, but if you look at the multiples for any of the franchisors in this, most of the growth's coming. Well, at least up until I haven't seen it, but most of the growth's coming from the international.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
In spite of this,
it's just because American brands. I mean, it's a natural, right? American brands, international, are just huge. But then you've got issues like look what happened when you've got McDonald's in Russia. I mean, international is very difficult for all businesses, right? We all know that. But franchisor adds another whole level of complexity. But it's a huge opportunity.
This is wonderful. Ken, it's much honor to have this with you, and you are writing a history.
All right.
Here at
well,
Babson.
Hopefully, I thank you guys for inviting me.
so
It's
much,
been a
Ken.
blast. I love doing all this, and I love talking about these topics.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Stars of Franchising.
Stars of Franchising was produced at Babson College, engineered by Travis Gray. Karen Soa is our guest coordinator, and music by Ralph Taylor.
If you like Stars of Franchising, be sure to review us wherever you get your podcasts, and spread the word and share these stories any way you can.